Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the definitive story of Tetris, going all the way from the Cold War to the human brain. We're going to explore how a simple, unassuming Soviet puzzle game completely transformed into a global phenomenon. I mean, we're talking about a game that transcended borders, outlasted empires, and as you'll see later, literally rewires our cognitive landscape. It's a wild ride.
So, let's just start with a really shocking number, 13. Just let that sink in for a second.
13 years. The creator of the world's most famous video game had to wait over a decade just to receive a single dime in royalties. Crazy, right? It's an unbelievable fact, but it really perfectly kicks off the geopolitical thriller we were about to jump into, starting right behind the Iron Curtain.
Part 1. The Soviet Spark. Let's travel back to the mid-1980s, deep within the rigid, complex bureaucracy of the Soviet Union. The Cold War is still very much a reality, and the whole personal computer revolution, well, it's really just barely beginning to take shape.
Okay, so it's 1984, and we meet Alexei Pajitnov. He's a speech recognition researcher at the Soviet Academy of Sciences. During his spare time, he draws inspiration from a physical puzzle called Pentominoes and decides to build a digital version. Now, he programmed the very first version on this primitive computer called the Electronica 60. And get this, it didn't even have graphics. He literally had to use text brackets to represent the blocks. But shortly after, a 16-year-old intern named Vadim Gerasimov helped port it over to the IBM PC, finally adding some colors. From there, the game was copied onto floppy disks and spread across Moscow and Eastern Europe like absolute wildfire. It was a completely grassroots, word-of-mouth rise to fame.
Now you might be wondering, what made it so incredibly addictive? Well, Pajitnov brilliantly scaled the game down to just 7 basic shapes. He called them tetramanos, kind of a fun mashup of the Greek word for 4 and his favorite sport, tennis. And the mechanics, just perfectly simple. You don't have a pre-existing puzzle to solve. Instead, you just manage the chaos as pieces fall from the top of the matrix. You rotate, you clear the lines, and the speed relentlessly increases until the blocks stack to the top. It's an infinitely engaging loop.
Moving into Part 2, the Great Licensing War. Because as the game inevitably leaked into the West, it triggered what you can really only call a massive, chaotic corporate heist. This wasn't just a fun game anymore. It was a high-stakes battle for global distribution rights.
Let's unpack this culture clash because it is fascinating. On one side, you have Elorg. They're a massive, very protective Soviet state-owned software monopoly, highly suspicious of Western capitalism, and crucially holding the actual legal rights. Why? Because Pajitnov, as a Soviet employee, couldn't personally profit from his creation. Then on the other side, you have these frantic Western software companies, places like Andromeda and Microsoft. They were out there sub-licensing and selling rights they never actually fully possessed to begin with. They created this incredibly messy, completely illegal web of distribution across Europe and America.
And this is where Hank Rogers enters the picture. He's a gutsy Dutch video game producer living in Japan. In 1988, he makes this absolutely legendary pitch to Nintendo, who were busy developing their new, top-secret handheld console. Nintendo was kind of unsure what game to package with their device, and Rogers told them point blank, if you want little boys to buy your Game Boy, then include Mario. But if you want everyone to buy your Game Boy, then you should include Tetris. I mean, what a line. Nintendo was totally sold.
Which brings us to one of the most incredible, movie-like moments in gaming history. February 1989, a bizarre, high-stakes corporate standoff. Hank Rogers, Robert Stein, and Kevin Maxwell all converge on Moscow at the exact same time, without even knowing the others were there. They all wanted the handheld rights, and they all had to face Nikolai Bilikov, the cutthroat director of Elorg, who was understandably absolutely furious to discover Western companies had been making millions off console versions of Tetris without paying the Soviets a dime. It was a tense, Cold War boardroom showdown.
Ultimately, Rogers won over the Soviets, mostly through sheer, refreshing honesty. He also really bonded personally with the game's creator, Pajitnov. So, Rogers secured the exclusive console rights for Nintendo, which completely pulled the rug out from under companies like Atari's Tengen brand. They were literally forced by a U.S. court to destroy 150,000 unauthorized Tetris cartridges. And that same year, Nintendo went on to sell an astounding 35 million Game Boys bundled with Tetris, a total game changer.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that Alexei Pajitnov finally got his due. Rogers helped him immigrate to the United States in 1991. Then, when the original Soviet rights finally expired in 1996, the two friends formed the Tetris Company. 13 long years after creating a masterpiece that conquered the globe, Pajitnov finally started seeing the profits he genuinely deserved.
All right, part 3, rewiring the human brain. Let's completely switch gears here and pivot from the geopolitical to the biological. Because the story of Tetris, it's actually the story of our minds. It turns out this game does a whole lot more than just kill time.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever played so much Tetris that you close your eyes and literally see falling blocks? Or maybe you're looking at boxes on a supermarket shelf and you start imagining how they could perfectly slot together? Well, you're not crazy. This is a documented psychological condition known as the Tetris Effect, and it demonstrates some profound neuroplasticity in our working memory.
And we're not just talking about daydreams here. Studies using actual MRI scans proved that playing Tetris physically alters your brain. When you play, you are intensely engaging your visuospatial working memory. Over time, this actually increases the cortical thickness in Brodmann area 6. That's the part of your brain responsible for planning complex movements. You are quite literally physically rewiring your brain structure and strengthening those synaptic connections. Mind-blowing stuff. This deep neuroplasticity actually led to an astonishing medical breakthrough spearheaded by clinical psychologist Emily Holmes. Researchers discovered that Tetris can act as a kind of cognitive vaccine against post-traumatic stress disorder. The process is incredible. A patient visualizes an unwanted traumatic memory, and then they immediately play Tetris for 20 minutes. This creates what researchers call task competition. Essentially, both the traumatic memory and the game of Tetris are fighting for the exact same limited visual resources in your brain. Because the brain's visuospatial working memory has limited capacity, the visually demanding nature of Tetris literally blocks the traumatic imagery from locking in. The results from a recent study on frontline healthcare workers are staggering. The group that played Tetris experienced 10 times fewer intrusive memories after 4 weeks compared to a control group that just listened to Mozart. And after 6 months, 70% of the Tetris players were completely flashback-free. The game literally interrupts the consolidation of trauma.
Which brings us to part 4. Beyond the kill screen. Finally, let's look at the endless cultural legacy of this perfectly designed puzzle. Because Tetris isn't just some retro relic from the 80s, it is constantly evolving and pushing human limits even today.
For decades, humans thought level 29 on the classic Nintendo version was completely mathematically impossible to beat. It was known as the kill screen because the blocks fell faster than the game's internal software actually allowed you to move the controller left or right. It was considered the hard, absolute limit of human play.
But you know, gamers, they refused to accept that limit. Thanks to the classic Tetris World Championship, a totally new generation of players invented a physical technique called rolling. They literally drum their fingers on the back of the controller to push the buttons way faster than the game was ever designed to handle. In 2023, a player rolled so incredibly fast and got so far past the kill screen that they actually crashed the game's code. No way, right? And on modern consoles, titles like Tetris 99 have transformed the formula into a frantic 99-player battle royale. The core mechanics just remain infinitely scalable.
And its dominance in the market? Completely undeniable. Sitting at nearly 500 million copies sold across more than 70 different platforms, Tetris absolutely crushes modern multi-million-dollar heavyweights like Call of Duty. Think about that for a second. It just proves that pure, perfect gameplay will always stand the test of time.
So it really leaves us with a profound question about why organizing descending geometry brings us so much peace. In a world full of unpredictable chaos, perhaps we all just crave the simple, satisfying feeling of putting things in exactly the right place. I hope this explainer gave you a brand new appreciation for the greatest puzzle ever built, the fascinating folks who fought for it, and the incredible ways it shapes our very minds. Keep clearing those lines.